Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Remember, today is International No, it's not, it's Vyshyvanka Day. Vyshyvanka, very funny. And I am celebrating that, as indeed Volodymyr Zelensky and his good wife are as well. I do think he looks dapper in that. So these are a nice shirt, especially if you get them just right. And I think this one from Mark and Oliner is a prime example of that. And Vlod there doing a good job in wearing that well. But then who am I to judge? Right, we're going to start this bit of extra tidbits with Artur Yakubov, the imam of a Kharkiv mosque. He has sadly died defending Ukraine at just 34 years old. After the start of the full-scale war, he witnessed the Russian invasion and the first battles in Kharkiv region with his own eyes. Artur took his family abroad and returned to Ukraine. His house, which was located in a village on the outskirts of Kharkiv, was destroyed by the Russian invaders. Artur Yakubov also taught in the Berlik School Crimean Tatar Lyceum in the village of Chaika, Kiev region. He volunteered in the frontline regions. Eternal memory and eternal glory to a Ukrainian hero. So this is interesting, but I'm just pointing this out because of the broad church that Ukraine actually is, and to go against this idea that they're Ukraine Nazis and all that, especially when you've got Crimean Tatars who very much favour Ukraine rather than Russia, and they are predominantly Muslim minority, and they are in this case I assume he was a Crimean Tatar of Crimean Tatar descent, or is one, rather than being another sort of Muslim citizen of Ukraine. But that's it's a sad loss for the Ukrainians losing anyone, but it's interesting that there is this variety of people fighting on behalf of Ukraine, or for Ukraine. I presume he's just a full Ukrainian Crimean Tatar citizen there. Going to go on to do quite an in-depth look at disinformation, as is often my want. This is a comment. It's just a comment, but it's much bigger and more far-reaching than the piece to which it responds. And who wrote this comment? Oh, it's JR. We're giving JR some love, much deserved love. He is a legend in his own underwear. I never know quite what that means, but he is a total legend. And let's recognise his awesomeness. He's written effectively an article. This reminds me of the sort of post I would have written when I was writing more. I'm doing too much YouTubing now to write so much, but this is a great, essentially, article that we're going to dip into. And although it is written as a comment, I mean, it is formatted as an article. It is substantially justified with lots of hyperlinks, and obviously I can't tell you all the hyperlinks, so many, if you're just listening to this, many of the points that are made here are themselves referenced, and then there are quotes, various quotes that we'll go into. So JR says, I don't think people here realise how effective the use of disinformation is. And I'm not talking about the opinions of individuals who just share something on Facebook, but state actors and organisations that want to influence geopolitical affairs. This is totally in line with everything we talk about here, and I'm so glad he's written this. Russia, for example, and again hyperlinked, has an extensive arsenal of methods to spread disinformation. This includes state-sponsored media such as RT and Sputnik, which reach both domestic and foreign audiences with a mix of real news and propaganda. Social media and bots are used to spread false information quickly and on a large scale. Troll factories such as the Internet Research Agency, so that's one that was started by Prigozhin, and then he's referenced all of these, are notorious for running fake accounts that insert themselves into online discussions to sow division and influence public opinion. And he then is supporting this with a comment with a quote, tens of thousands of comments. At first, Prigozhin only had a few dozen workers charged with writing about 100 comments each per day. By early 2023, the troll factory had grown to about 400 employees. Some of them wrote articles for Prigozhin's media, and at least a quarter wrote comments for social media. Wow, that's pretty much incredible. Pretty incredible that, and that's from Wired. These are not accounts that share opinions, as back to JR, but bots or people with fake accounts pretending to be other non-existent people with non-existent or fake opinions who purposefully and systematically aim to influence us. The hundreds of employees in troll factories like Prigozhin's, now dead but the network is still active, are tasked with writing thousands of comments every day, not to participate in honest discussions but to deliberately spread misinformation and shape public opinions, to manipulate. And the quote here is, Russian influence operations linked to the notorious leader of the Wagner Group mercenary troops, Yevgeny Prigozhin, remain active months after his death, according to new research. Now, it's interesting. I remember years ago reading about the Internet Research Agency and Russian troll activities. And one example I remember, and I'm probably going to bastardize this, but it's something like you would have an embroidery blog set up, right? And it will be set up as an American embroiderer, I don't know, somewhere in the Midwest or whatever, writing pieces on how to do embroidery and what seemingly genuine stuff that's of a particular nature in a particular subject area. But then within these blog pieces, they would be inserted certain opinions now and again, and then 1 out of 4 pieces maybe overtly politicized or on a subject matter that was particularly divisive or in line with what the Russian narrative would dictate. And so these are very cleverly constructed. Yeah, it's not just people on YouTube comment threads like we see here. It's not just bots and trolls on Twitter, either creating content or amplifying content by liking and retweeting, and then you've got AI that is generating content automatically. It's very worrying, the state of affairs at the moment. But it can also be entire websites set up that are fronts for, I guess, narrative laundering, you could say, where they are taking Russian narratives and Russian disinformation and then throwing them out into the world. But you get sucked into that by being interested in embroidery, just following this website, reading the scare quotes American embroiderer, and then going down that rabbit hole that you are led down. Anyway, I digress. JR continues, these organised campaigns are designed to sow division, promote conspiracy theories and undermine trust in democratic institutions. I mean, this is so spot on. It is a systematic and well-organised approach that goes far beyond individual opinions and spontaneous messages. This is very different from the normal opinion of a normal citizen because it is taking place deliberately and on a large scale with a clear political and destabilising purpose. Just as our military has a responsibility to protect our country, the government also has a responsibility to protect us from this form of warfare. I freaking love what JR is saying here. I'd be proud to write something this on point. As an ordinary citizen, he continues, you can do little about this and you are largely powerless. It is therefore essential that the government develops and implements effective strategies to counter this threat and protect society while guaranteeing freedom of expression and ensuring sufficient checks and balances to prevent abuse and with clear boundaries for what constitutes harmful disinformation is considered. So this is so important. I keep talking about how we are involved in a war, and many of us don't realize it because this is a war in the information spaces. And by you guys commenting, even when you say this is one for the algo that is trying to promote my content here by putting comments below, which that feeds into the algorithm that says, oh, there are lots of comments on this video, therefore this video is garnering lots of interaction, therefore it's a really good video, good scare quotes, it's it fits in line with what YouTube want, and so they throw it out even more, and it's snowball effect. And that's kind of how YouTube works and the algorithms sort of work. And with you guys commenting as you do and saying the nice things you do, and sometimes for those people saying the bad things they do, they still get, and this is how trolls get a bit of traction, is because we react to them rather than ignoring them, or I often hide them from the threads. By hiding them, you don't actually delete them or block them, but no one can see them, but it's like shadow ban. The way I believe blocking works on YouTube is that say a Russian troll is still commenting. The ones I've sort of scare quotes banned are still commenting on the threads. They just don't realize they've been banned until they realise that none of their comments are garnering a single like or response. Anyway, the what you guys do in the comments thread is actually partaking in the information war, whether you know it or not. You're involved in promoting my content, which is on the side, hopefully you would recognize, this is what I see it as, being on the side of free and fair democracy, being on the side of moral rectitude, being on the side of the Ukrainians, and fighting in that information space. We are involved in this war. But there are so many people that don't realize that they are in this war, don't realize they're being manipulated, feel powerless, or are powerless because they don't realize, they have no realization. And this is all the sort of stuff that JR is talking about here. A clear example of this is the involvement, he continues, of Russian entities in a women's march in the United States. According to an investigation by The Times, more than 4,000 miles away, so this is a quote from The Times, the organisations linked to the Russian government had assigned teams to the women's march at desks in bland offices in St. Petersburg using models derived from advertising and public relations. Copywriters were testing out social media messages critical of the women's march movement, adopting the personas of fictional Americans. So let's finish the Times piece, the Times quote. The investigation found that Kremlin-backed accounts posed as, quote, black women critical of white feminism, conservative women who felt excluded, and men who mocked participants as hairy-legged whiners. Now, I wonder if there are any of you viewers out there who, at the time, denigrated the Women's March when it happened in the US and promoted comments like that from people that seemed to be Americans, fellow Americans, who were slagging off the Women's March from these particular viewpoints, whether you might have retweeted what was actually a Russian troll strategically placing their comments in there under this fake avatar. And we talked about this previously, about how there are many ways you can tell who are the trolls on Facebook. I mean, Twitter. Quite often they are the ones with blue ticks. And from their bios, you can tell them by their just complete obsession with one topic when you look down their thread history. I looked at one the other day that had only written 6 comments since they'd started. All of their comments were reactions to others, which meant that they weren't coming onto Twitter to cast opinions. They were going onto Twitter to isolate problematic opinions and then slag them off, or react to divisive opinions and amplify them. Their whole raison d'etre for being on Twitter was reactionary and not creative. And I think that's a really good indicator of someone who is just a troll. This approach proved to be particularly effective because it responds to existing social tensions and exacerbates them through targeted disinformation. By posing as authentic members of different communities, these accounts become more credible and have a broader impact on public opinion. This results in an erosion of trust, disruption of democratic processes, and increased social polarization. So, as I've said many times before, it's not necessarily that these opinions are completely fabricated opinions by the Russians. These are opinions that other people have, or there might be grievances that certain political parties have. But it's the process of amplifying them by if you have thousands of trolls amplifying these fringe views, then people look at these views and think, well, these views aren't fringe, are they? And then it changes the political landscape in whatever country you're in, and then it gives credibility to those viewpoints from those fringe people and brings that Overton window of what's acceptable conversation around to the fringe, and then that becomes credible, and you end up going down that rabbit hole and voting for those people, where normally if that hadn't been amplified by the Russians, it wouldn't have registered. This is kind of using things like the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is how advertising works, and it's how divisive people get really popular, right? This is so this is how, if you see an advert on Coca-Cola all the time, Coke, you think, oh, what am I going to drink? Oh, let's have a can of Coke. And it's just merely being exposed to those words, those ideas, to that thing, makes that thing more prevalent in your mind. Now, this was the case with, and I am picking a divisive topic, but I'm trying not to be divisive. It's just literally statistically what happened. So in the time leading up to the Brexit referendum in the UK, Nigel Farage kept complaining that oh, the BBC's really biased and blah blah blah. And it actually wasn't. Statistically, when you look at it, Nigel Farage was the politician who wasn't even a politician, who appeared 33 times on the flagship programme Question Time, the political debate programme. So he appeared way more than anyone else. He appeared more than, say, Caroline Lucas, who was an elected politician in the Green Party. UKIP had, at that time, no... they had Douglas Carswell, who had defected and then was eventually re-elected for UKIP. But Caroline Lucas appeared on there a fraction of the amount that Nigel Farage did. But because his viewpoints were being amplified, and because he's whinging and whatever, he was then placed on this program an awful lot. Now, what that meant is that people were constantly seeing him. And then he was in the news, and this is exactly what happened with Donald Trump in 2016. This is the mere exposure effect working so perfectly, is that the more people get on TV, even if they're divisive, and even if half the people hate them, the more you talk about them, the more credible they become, literally credible. Like if you look at the statistic, if you look at the research, it goes into the mere exposure effect. Like they are given more credibility. So the more Trump appears on TV, even now with like this is why they say bad publicity is good publicity. It's like even with all the legal issues he has and appearances in court, if he can get on TV, always on TV, then he's in people's minds the whole time. And actually, even that behavior, which is negative, going to court, breaking the law, blah, 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 ends up being more acceptable because you're immunized to it and you're just seeing them all the time and it all becomes part of the fabric, becomes part of the background. It's the mere exposure effect. It's just by merely being exposed to something all the time, it becomes more acceptable and more credible. And then it's part of the national conversation, and then it's acceptable to vote for those people, etc., etc. And that is kind of what the Russian disinformation agents do, is expose people, amplify fringe views so that they become, or they appear to become, mainstream views, and then they become part of that fabric so that eventually they do become mainstream views, and you have shifted the political that Overton window. Effectively, you've shifted the landscape, you've remolded the landscape to fit in with what your objectives are, and that's what Russia have so successfully done. Anyway, this is from NBC News, a quote. A Senate report released in 2018 already confirmed that the Kremlin-backed internet research agency established troll farms, or masses of fake accounts, to pose as black people online and suppress the black vote to help Donald Trump win the 2016 presidential election. That's just another example of what they're doing, pretending to be certain people. I've talked about this very early on in my channel, where I said there are people on Twitter, as I mentioned earlier, that will, or in YouTube comments, as soon as someone introduces themselves, it's a high probability, not all the time, but there's a high probability. If you say, there are two examples. One was like, I'm a Turkish working class mum, blah 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 blah, and then launches into, so as a Turkish working class single mum, blah 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 blah, and that's the first comment this person's ever put on that thread, and they just almost like formally introduce themselves in a way that you just wouldn't do normally, unless you are trying to use those identities to get other people who associate with any one of those identity components. So either I'm Turkish, or I'm working class, or I'm a single mum, and I associate with you, and then comes the really divisive bit of politics, and you go, I associate with you. Oh, hang on. But now I'm conflicted because I associate with you, and now you said something I wouldn't normally think is acceptable, but now I'm going to think maybe it is acceptable because I'm also a single working class mum. Okay, and I've had these, the classic ones. There was a guy, Solid Faux Life, used to come on, although then he was this commenter that then end up challenging me and saying, and having this kind of YouTube channel where he did end up being a black guy, but then there were loads of us thinking, well, I think he's been fronted. The stuff he was saying was so like pro-Russian and it was all controversial. But he was another example, and this might have been genuine, but he was like, I'm a black guy. His first ever comment on the thread was like, as as a black guy who voted for Joe Biden but will never vote for Joe Biden again, blah, 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 blah. So you're like, okay, I'm a black guy. I voted for Joe Biden. Oh, no, but you won't vote for him again. And here's a divisive bit. So it gives you that in, and then it morphs you into being aligned with whatever that political direction was. And so quite often you really see that. So when it's talking about people pretending to be black people to move the black vote, and you're going to have people pretend to be white working class people. There'll be all these demographic areas that will be targeted by the Russians that will have certain. You will have those demographics and then attach your divisive rhetoric to them, and you'll be targeting people in different areas, and it'll be maybe different blogs, different. You might go and look at, I don't know, the Daily Mail and troll the Daily Mail threads, but you'd have a slightly different approach there to if you're trolling maybe the Guardian threads or some Facebook group here, or so. It's very targeted and very well thought through, so that it gets the end result, which is just a completely divided electorate that is confused, and that in the end the Russians can take advantage of, or it drives towards a particular candidate. An investigation into the 2016 US presidential election, the activities of Russian fake accounts showed how these accounts used YouTube and other platforms to spread content that influenced public opinion and made opposing views less visible. So it's not just about amplifying one side. It's by point of fact that you amplify one side, it's this kind of zero-sum game. You drown out the other view, the other side. A good example of Denk in the Netherlands. So Denk planned, this is a quote from, let's have a look, from MPO Radio 1, that's a Dutch source. Denk planned a fake news campaign in the run-up to the 2017 House of Representatives elections under campaign leader Fareed Azarkan. The party planned to pose as the PVV, so that's the right-wing party of the Geert Wilders that's just now got into power. They've just sorted out a coalition. I meant to report on that this morning, but forgot. And advertised with the slogan, "After March 15th, we will cleanse the Netherlands." End quote. Denk has also been linked to the influence of foreign actors such as the Turkish government, which is said to have supported the party through Turkish state media and religious organisations in the Netherlands. To say the least, this is not in the interests of the Netherlands. People have the right to believe whatever they want, says JR, including the idea that the earth is flat. However, when such beliefs are promoted in ways that cause social harm, such as undermining public health measures or national security, intervention may be necessary. I'm going to not really disagree. I'm going to refine that point. I hear this an awful lot. You've got a right to that opinion, and you hear this all the time, as if that allows you to be able to promulgate complete nonsense. And I don't think you do have a right to an opinion. I could get into the rights don't exist. They don't exist out there. They exist in here, right? And so only when we agree by consensus and enact those ideas that we have about what rights should be into law, and have those laws, enacted and then enforced by the judiciary system and the law enforcement system, do rights kind of exist in any meaningful, tangible way. But we need to do all that work first to get that done. Now, the right to hold an opinion sounds really good, but what does that really mean? Right to free speech. Okay. Well, yeah, I would say, for me, I'd just refine that and say, yeah, you have got a right to an opinion if you justify it. And if you don't justify it, you don't have a right to it. Or it's just an unjustified opinion, which is worthless. I couldn't give So, yeah, by all means have an opinion, but you've got to work to justify that. You don't just get to splurge your opinions and say, I've got a right to that, because some of those opinions can be super dangerous. I could splurge racist opinions here and incite people to violence, and then it turns out I'm Hitler, and it's like, yeah, but I've got the right to be. I've got the right to these opinions. It's like, yeah, okay, we can argue about that. And again, it goes back to my what's called ontology, the philosophy of existence, about what a right is. So that's why I'm quite dismissive of a right to an opinion. I just think it's a bit of a soundbite. But But however, if such beliefs are promoted in ways that cause social harm, which is where JR went with that, such as undermining public health measures or national security, intervention may be necessary. And anyway, and another tactic is suppressing things through bots and organised reporting campaigns on platforms like YouTube. And bots can massively dislike videos and leave negative comments, which reduces the visibility of this content. In addition, organised groups, and they do a lot of things like reporting en masse, don't they? In addition, organised groups conduct coordinated reporting attacks. Oh, here he goes. Reporting attacks, reporting videos as violating the platform's terms of use when they do not. This leads to videos being removed temporarily or permanently, which has a significant impact on the dissemination of information and perspectives. These forms of digital repression disrupt the free supply of information. And then he quotes from a US Congress committee report. The Kremlin has launched multiple disinformation campaigns in the Netherlands and made attempts to interfere with it in its elections. And the Dutch government has taken several steps to build both national and regional resilience. JR continues, in addition, Russian actors use hacking and leaks, stealing and disclosing sensitive information to cause chaos and distrust. Fake websites and manipulated news articles are created to spread disinformation, often disguised as legitimate news sources. This is like the 80-20 theory, and where you surround stuff with genuine, and that's what I was talking about with the embroidery blog, is you surround it with 80% is genuine stuff, but then you have your Easter egg thing of 20% of complete divisive disinformation, which is a real challenge there. So, as he quotes from a Guardian article, Russia is increasingly seeking to encourage and direct hackers to attack British and other Western targets, the director of GCHQ said in her first keynote speech as head of the British Intelligence Agency. I reported that the other day. Traditional media can also be influenced because they can take things from fake news sites and or via advertisements. Furthermore, fake news often spreads faster and further than real news, making the impact of these disinformation campaigns even greater. And this is absolutely true. That's been found in replicated research. Fake news travels about 6 times faster than real news on social media. Quote, we found that falsehoods diffuse significantly further, faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth in all categories of information, and in many cases by an order of magnitude, says Sinan Arala, professor at MIT at Sloan School of Management and co-author of a new paper detailing these findings. In addition, there's also an increasing use of deep fakes and manipulated videos, which are increasingly difficult to distinguish from real footage and are being used more often. These different methods are often combined to achieve the greatest possible effect and are very effective in undermining confidence in democratic processes and disrupting social cohesion. Bots and state actors are not interested in open debate, but aim to cause social unrest. This is why I often talk about good faith actors or good faith interlocutors. If you're up for a proper debate about this, and where you are willing to change your mind, you're open to the idea that you might be wrong. That's what's called epistemic humility. Like, I'm humble about my position here, and I could be wrong. If you're open to a good faith discussion where we can try and convince each other either way, then fair enough. But if you're a troll that's being paid to say this nonsense, and there's physically nothing I can say that would change your view because you're paid not to have that view, then there's no point talking to you, which means that your presence here is merely a tool for in this case the Russian government, and therefore I have no compunction with banning you from my threads because you are just a soldier for the Russian information army, and there's no discussion here. There is just you in an offensive where I am therefore constantly on the defense, and I can never defeat you, if you like, in this battle of wits and minds. But yeah. To repeat, bots and state actors are not interested in open debate but aim to cause social unrest. There is a big difference between a personal opinion and organised disinformation campaigns. Absolutely. And this is why I think we need to do something against Russian disinformation projects. Tackling this last form of disinformation is not censorship. And, JR and myself obviously agree wholeheartedly here, but a necessary measure to protect society against deliberate manipulation and destabilisation. Certain regulations must ensure fair and free elections, which is a fundamental part of a healthy democracy. Although you cannot expect a certain degree of media literacy and fact-checking from citizens, it is unrealistic to think that they can independently combat the massive and well-organised disinformation campaigns of state actors. An example, and this is taken from a New York Times piece, quote, the video, though, showed what purported to be photographs of a purchase contract and the villa itself, creating a veneer of authenticity for credible viewers. The property is, in fact, part of a resort owned by Orascom Development, whose website includes El Guna's year-round sunshine, shimmering lagoons, sandy beaches and azure waters. An article about the video's claim appeared 2 days later as a paid advertisement or branded content on Punch, a news outlet in Nigeria, as well as 3 other Nigerian websites that aggregate news and entertainment content. The article had the byline of Arthur Kono, who, according to internet searches, does not appear to have written any other articles. The article quoted a political scientist, Abdulrahman Alabasi, who also does not appear to exist except in accounts linking the villa to the corrupt use of Western financial aid to Ukraine. Punch, which later removed the post, did not respond to requests for comment. A day later, the claim made its first appearance on X in a post by Sonja van den Ende, an activist in the Netherlands whose articles have previously appeared on propaganda outlets linked to the Russian government, according to the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Quote, brackets, she also served as an election observer in an occupied territory of Ukraine during Russian parliamentary elections in September. So there's your connection of finding, we saw this in that Swedish, if you remember, it was Swedish media, it was information laundering, wasn't it? Information laundering. This was, I went through this with you previously on how, where are you? I'm sure it's there. I'll find it. I went through this with you a few weeks ago. Here we go. Right, so how pro-Russian disinformation is laundered. And if you remember, it's like it starts with a YouTube channel which is anonymous. So this is exactly what they're talking about here, what JL's talking about. Starts with an anonymous YouTube channel producing some spurious claim that's pro-Russian. Then that gets picked up by other YouTube channels that are also spurious, and then that gets picked up, and the key part here is by Egyptian sort of established media. And in JL's case, it's picked up by a Dutch writer who's pro-Russian but has an agenda, and so it's probably looking out for this, probably being tipped off to this, and then it's a way of getting into, it gets spread and spread and spread, then gets reported in mainstream media, and you have this cycle that whereby it's then reported in Western mainstream media, so then Russian media picks that up as an established fact and then reports it to the Russian public, as in this is international media reporting this. And of course it was the Russians that planted that first outside of Russia in, say, Egypt or in Nigeria or wherever it may be. I find it really, really effective. Right, so anyway, going back to JR's piece, within days, reports about the villa appeared on X in French and Romanian and in English on 3 different Reddit forums. According to Roberta Duffield, Director of Intelligence for Blackbird.ai, and the internet security company, nearly 29% of the accounts amplifying the reports appeared to be inauthentic bots, an unusually high number that would normally indicate a coordinated campaign. 8 days after the video appeared, Russia's state television networks like Channel 1, Rossiya 24 and RT in Arabic and German reported it as a major revelation uncovered by a renowned Egyptian investigative journalist. So this could be that same one, actually. The story seemed to stall there. Naguib Sawiris, the scion of the Egyptian family that owned the development, curtly denied the sale in a reply to X. So I think this must have been the sale of that mansion to Zelensky, and no more was heard from them or about the character called Mohammed Al-Alawi until late December. That was when 2 videos emerged on a YouTube channel called Egypt News claiming that he was dead. So I don't know what the core original story was, but you get the idea of how these things propagate, and the challenges we all have in trying to work out what is true and what is untrue, and that will, I think, depend an awful lot on our own media literacy. And then you can talk about, well, how do we tackle this? Well, in, for example, Finland, of late, there's been in the education system this real emphasis on disinformation, on learning how to navigate the information world. and then JR says, after which it's thrown into the news cycle. And then here is from, what's this? I'm not sure what the original source is to this. We further provide evidence that likely bots played a disproportionate role in the dissemination of pro-Russian messages and amplified its proliferation. Overall, 20.28% of the spreaders are classified as likely bots, most of which were created at the beginning of the invasion. So, you look at who's amplifying these messages of disinformation. You look on Twitter, like we often do on YouTube, when you look at some of the YouTube accounts that are Yahooing for Russia, and you look, you were created in March 2022. I wonder what happened then. It's just after the Russians invaded. Okay, and you see that they're very recent, maybe newer than that, and you're thinking, you haven't been around long. You're not really an established YouTube channel. You've just been created with the sole intent of amplifying disinformation. And then he quotes from one of my articles, whoop, 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 which was, what was the article was, now Russia's waging war on me. Okay, so what did I say? We are living in an era where national security and cybersecurity have been joined by epistemic security. In philosophy, epistemology is a study of knowledge and truth. The terms national security or cybersecurity will be familiar, but we argue that more attention ought to be paid to epistemic security, because without it, our societies will lose the ability to respond to the most severe risks we face in the future. I am quoting for the BBC in that particular paragraph. I think you can't double indent on these comments. In our report, we explore some of the possible consequences if we don't act in this future. The ability for the general population to tell the difference between truth and fiction is entirely lost, says the BBC. Although information is easily available, people cannot tell whether anything they see, read, or hear is reliable or not. A next pandemic. And then to which I say, or war, because the BBC wrote on epistemic security, so this issue with not knowing fact from fiction with regard to the claims surrounding the pandemic. And then I sort of said, well, it can be just as relevant to the war. Until the next war comes along, cooperation across society becomes impossible. Where one of the outcomes may be that the general population is no longer able to tell the difference between truth and fiction, although information is easily available, people cannot tell whether something they see, read, or hear is reliable or not. So when the next pandemic or war breaks out, cooperation across society may become impossible, is how he translates that. So that's him translating, I presume, the English quote of what was said there. What does this all mean? For those who are willing to put in the effort, a rich and balanced media diet is more accessible than ever before. However, being well informed is often a privilege of time and resources that most people cannot easily afford. So when it comes to tackling complex challenges like COVID-19, challenges that require timely decision-making and a coordination of widespread collective action, it is important to remember that sensible public health advice and safe vaccines are not enough. People also have to believe in the solutions that those who offer them. So translated, it's tough. You need information literacy. You need time and effort. This is the Brandolini's law in action, which is this is called the bullshit asymmetry. I've talked about this many times before. The idea is that you can make a disinformation claim, and that's very easy to make up. You can make up some BS claim, put it on the internet, and there's 5 minutes of me writing, job done. Poof, goes out there, it spreads around like wildfire, and then unpicking that or debunking that takes hours and hours of cited academic work, if you like, to fully debunk that claim. But then that debunking, not only does it take you longer, is more of an effort, but it doesn't get the traction, it doesn't get sent out, it doesn't mitigate against the original claims and the damage that those original claims do. And the advantage is to the people who spread BS is easy, it spreads more easily, and the damage can't be reversed. And now we're living in an era where that is coming at us from geopolitical angles, domestic political angles, pandemics. You can talk about statistics to do with any element, I guess, crime, this, that, and whatever. We are being bombarded with disinformation. It's happening at the moment on the campaign trail in the US, where Trump is at the moment trying to spread lies about crime waves in the US, and that is actually not true. And I was asking the other day, like, what can we do about politicians who overtly lie? Like, there has to be some recourse, because we aren't allowed as advertisers in the UK to advertise things that are openly false. So you get done by Ofcom in the UK, which is the communications regulator. So if you false advertising, we know that legally you can't just say, oh, by the way, if you drink Coke, it increases your IQ by like 37%, and also it you know, I don't know, it makes your biceps bigger. It's like, that's absolute BS. So you can't say that to manipulate the audience into buying your products. However, politicians appear to be able to go out and overtly lie on the campaign trail to get themselves elected. And the damage of that far outweighs the damage of selling a few more Cokes, right? And yet we can regulate one area but not regulate the other area. So it just seems, I think we really need to tackle much more effectively disinformation and outright lying, and we should not be allowed to get away with outright lying. When we lie about people, it's kind of slander, and you get taken to court, and you look at what Trump had then been saying about, say, E. Jean Carroll after the court case, and he can be found responsible for that, and there are legal avenues there, and it's kind of more often, if it's personal, because there's an individual that's affronted by that libel or slander, they will take the person or the media entity to court, because, like, you have defamed me, right? And so I want some recompense for that. And that stops people from doing that. But when you talk about just general, just so-called facts about reality, or claims about reality, like, oh, there's a massive crime wave going on in the US at the moment, and I'm the only person who can stop that crime wave, as a politician, you're like, well, that's a lie, but who's going to take you to court over that? And then if, say, the Democrats took Trump to court, then it would seem really kind of petty or whatever. So then you've got to, well, how do we debunk that? But the damage is done. It's out there, and it's exactly the same stuff. So we complain. I will complain about Russia doing this as a state actor, attacking our countries with disinformation. But our own politicians do it. And there appears to be very little recourse to them just splurging disinformation out there. But it's effectively the same thing. And so if you countenance doing something about international actors doing that, then you should likewise be advocating for some kind of regulation of speech. And this isn't about freedom of speech. This is about, because this is freedom to manipulate. If you're saying people are free to manipulate other people into making erroneous decisions based on lies, then whatever, like, we would just throw society out the window, because we're never going to know what's true, because everyone's lying. We can lie on TV, and we can lie in adverts, and we can lie in textbooks, and we can, or we say, right, we don't want that, so let's do something about that to make sure that we clean up our rhetoric and we clean up our information sources, so that we can trust our textbooks, and we can trust our news sources, and we can trust our politicians. And so therefore politicians need to be held to account, both internationally and domestically, so that they don't get away with just outright lying to their audiences. And I've banged on for way too long, but thanks to JR for this. I'm going to just hit you with one more thing. I'll leave everything else to another day. But this is totally apropos to what we've just been talking about. This comes from, I don't know, a source on Twitter, Natalka, Ukrainian-American woman, artist, whatever. Not whatever, but no one particularly famous or anything like that. But this is really interesting, because this talks about the is it the herring, the herring head, or the rotten herring? Jessica Arrow talks about this in her book Russian Trolls, which is a really good book, which discusses a lot of what we've just been talking about. So this person says, the methods used by Russian propaganda described by a Russian journalist. So this is a Russian journalist saying this. I studied at the Faculty of Journalism at Moscow State University. We had a military department. In an atmosphere of secrecy, we were taught special combat propaganda, the art of sowing discord in the ranks of the enemy with the help of disinformation and manipulation of consciousness. Let me tell you, it's a scary business. I'm not kidding. Combat, or black propaganda, allows any distortion of real facts to solve propaganda problems. This is an effective weapon used for the sole purpose of knocking out the enemy's brains. The rotten herring method, the inverted pyramid method, the big lie method, the 40 to 60 principle, the absolutely obvious method. You also know all these methods and techniques, you just didn't realize it had intended. 40-60 is what's talking about the 80-20 method. But 40-60 is like even worse. So 60% is true and fine, but 40% is disinformation smuggled in with the other lot, or vice versa, or whatever. The big lie, just sometimes lies are so big that they people find it hard to question them. The whole you could argue, well, I wouldn't argue, I think it's pretty well established, the whole election fraud lie. We were taught to use special propaganda techniques against soldiers of the enemy army. Today, they are used against the civilian population of our own country. For 2 years now, reading Russian newspapers or watching television shows, I've noted with interest that people coordinating the distribution and interpretation of news in Russia clearly learned from the same textbook as I have, from the same cheerful colonel or his colleagues. For example, the rotten herring method. It works like this. A false accusation is chosen. It is important that it is as dirty and scandalous as possible. For example, petty theft, child molestation, or murder, preferably out of greed, work well. The purpose of the rotten herring is not to prove the accusation, it's to cause a wide public discussion how it's unjust and unfair. The human psyche is arranged in such a way that as soon as the accusation becomes a subject matter of public discussion, its supporters and opponents, experts, rabid prosecutors and ardent defenders of the accused inevitably rise. But regardless of their views, all participants in the discussion again and again pronounce the name of the accused in connection with a dirty and scandalous accusation, thus rubbing more and more rotten herring into his clothes until finally the smell begins to follow him everywhere. The question killed, stole, seduced or not becomes the main one when his name is mentioned. This is in kind of debate in philosophy is called poisoning the well. So you poison a well by saying that this person is X, Y, Z, and then all of their academic work that they've done is poisoned by this accusation, which invalidates the actual substance of what they say, or at least that's the intention. You can sort of similar to shooting the messenger, etc., etc. Okay, or for example, the 40 to 60 method invented by Goebbels. It consists of in creating media that gives 60% of their information in the interest of the enemy. On the other hand, having earned his trust in this way, the remaining 40% are used for extremely effective, thanks to this trust, disinformation. So you gain their trust with 60% of actual stuff that either is totally what you believe in as well, or is just factual, and then you smuggle in a 40% that is what is your proper agenda. During World War II, there was a radio station with the anti-fascist world listened to. It was thought to be British. Only after the war did it turn out that it was actually Goebbels' radio station, which worked on the 40 to 60 principle he developed. Fascinating. The big lie method is very effective. It's a bit like the rotten herring method, but actually works differently. Its essence is to offer the audience such a universal and terrible lie with the highest degree of confidence that it's almost impossible to believe that it's possible to lie about such a thing. It's so how could you lie about it? It must be true because it's so it's such a nuts big thing. The trick here is that a properly composed and well-invented big lie causes such a deep emotional trauma to the listener or viewer that it will then determines his view for a long time, contrary to any arguments of logic and reason. False descriptions of cruel abuse of children or women work particularly well. But going back to big lie, I mean, the election fraud thing is still an issue, and it's still perpetrated. Even though Fox News were taken to court, settled out of court to the tune of, what was it, $888 million with Dominion, or $788 million, or whatever it was. They've admitted it was a lie. They've been taken to court. They didn't lose in court because they settled out of court, but they're being also taken to court by Smartmatic. And they have also, through that procedure, you had Tucker Carlson's emails and messages released where he admitted it was a big lie. So people out there should know it's a big lie. That the information's come out from both Fox News and and some of those people who are still kind of claiming that it was a lie. Like, the information is out. It's been challenged in courts 70 whatever times and has failed every single time. And yet people are still saying, oh, fraud, it was a lie, it was, that election never happened, Trump actually got in. There's no evidence to support this. The big lie is out there, and there will be some of you who will be spitting in the thread below that it was a fraud and that that Trump should be in, etc., etc. There will be some of you who are still sucked into that whole big lie. And the thing is, there's nothing we can do to get you out of it. At some point you might reach a threshold, some tipping point where you're like, oh, okay. But until that point, there is cognitive dissonance reduction going on in your head, where your core belief is being confronted by evidence against that belief. But rather than changing your core belief, you will smash the evidence out of the way, because that must remain. And you'll either adapt the evidence to your core belief, or you'll bury the core belief, or you'll shoot the messenger, poison the well. That came from this source, and I don't trust this source, and blah blah blah. And that core belief will remain because you've invested. It's like the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much time and effort in this belief that if you admit that it's wrong, it means that the last 2 years of your life is wrong. Last 4 years of your life is wrong. Last 4 years of your life denying all this, or denying the validity of that election, you have to admit was just absolutely wasted, and you were sucked in. And because you can't admit that you've lost 4 years of decent time devoted to spreading that lie, and that you were sucked into a big lie, that's such a hard thing to accept, that you would just perpetuate that same lie. You would double down. So people double down. They double down because they can't handle being wrong, admitting they're wrong in public. I wonder how many of you out there honestly still believe in that there's widespread election fraud that invalidates that whole election. I wonder how many of you have changed your mind, did believe that, and now realise that you were hoodwinked by people like Tucker Carlson, who have now admitted, that now it's publicly admitted that was BS. Let me know. I know this is divisive, and some of you be going, God, I'm never going to listen to you again because you believe that the election was valid. Well, yeah, so do many courts. Anyway, let's say that the message about a crucified child to the deep emotional trauma it causes will determine the views of the person who received this information for a long time, no matter how much someone tries to convince him later using logical arguments. But our cheerful colonel especially revered the method of absolute evidence, which delivers, although not fast, reliable results. So there are lots of techniques that the Russians use, both in terms of these mechanisms, but also things like troll farms and bot farms, and the amplification of views. And yeah, it is just a real challenge. But as someone answers to JR in the comments below his piece, fantastic substantiated story that confirms that fake news must be combated. I think almost everyone agrees with this. However, the question is, how? What next? What do we do about this? And that's a really good question. So what do you guys think? How do we combat disinformation on this scale? How do we combat state perpetrated hybrid warfare disinformation? What do we do about it? And then the follow-on question of what do we do about our own politicians who might be taking some of those ideas and running with it, or just splurging their own lies? How do we combat lying in light of freedom of speech? There is tension, and this is why I can go back to talking about rights. Rights don't exist. Right? We don't have a right to freedom of speech. Like, we generate that right and we encode it into some kind of law and we try and enact it, but actually it's really murky. And when does it become hate speech, and what is the exact demarcation point for hate speech and not hate speech? And of course, there is no truth to that. There's no reality to that. We just have to muddle on and agree and treat things on a case-by-case basis. But if you can argue there's a right to freedom of speech, then there's a right to lie, then there's a right to manipulate, then there's a right, all these competing rights. And how do we organize those rights into a hierarchy of what right trumps another right, if you even agree they're rights? And of course, there's all sorts of philosophy you have to do in order to argue each of these positions. I mean, I say none of them exist. and we just have to use moral philosophy to try and argue some rules of thumb which are useful, but they don't always cover everything, and there will be grey areas around the side of every rule that we put in place, because that's the nature of reality. It's not just black and white, it's all sorts of different greys, and it's very blurry and fuzzy around the edges, and there's fuzzy logic, and it's not like exact. There aren't these exact lines of demarcation that would be nice and easy for us. But if there were exact lines of demarcation, we wouldn't have Supreme Courts that have to constantly be working out how to interpret everything. That's life, right? It is complicated, and there ain't no right or wrong answer very often for very many things, at least not immediately obviously so. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon. Food for thought.